So I want to introduce everyone to Dr. Michael Ium. He's a former graduate of the Matripa College in Portland, Oregon. He's worked with, oh, now I'm not reading a script, so is Jose Cabezon, is that correct? As in, who's a renowned Buddhist scholar, and he's living here in Toronto at the moment, doing a postdoctoral fellow. And he's going to talk to us about Tsongkhapa, and I won't say any more about that to let him introduce his own topic there. And so I want to thank Michael for coming and speaking to us. Just one thing about Lama Yeshe and the reason why this is, I feel it's so auspicious. There's a thought that according to the center's name, that center become a bit of a specialist or emphasize the practices associated with the name of the center. So, for example, Land of Medicine Buddha, they promote Medicine Buddha a little bit. Kurukula Center, they do a bit of Kurukula practice, and so in our case, Lama, I think the most accessible approach for that is to do the Gaden Lagama practice, which we haven't done the past couple of years. We've been done other deity retreats over Christmas, but we have a history of doing Lama Tsongkhapa practice, and so I'm really delighted to hear and learn more about Lama Tsongkhapa today. Thank you everybody for coming. And so, Michael, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dave. I just want to thank Geshe Sunam and Venerable Kedru and the rest of the Lama Yeshe Ling team for inviting me. And yeah, thanks to all you folks for attending this morning. I'll just share my screen here. So you should be seeing my screen now. So of course, many of you probably know the Migsema prayer. I might say one thing about it that I just realized when I was thinking about it. Many of you probably know the story that Tsongkhapa actually composed this prayer to offer to one of his teachers, Rendawa, who then offered it back to him, saying it was a more suitable prayer for Tsongkhapa. And I realized the original 4-line poem doesn't have this third line here about Vajrapani, sort of crushing demon hordes. I thought that was interesting. We could just sort of highlight that because it sort of dovetails with the sort of general theme of my talk, just thinking of Tsongkhapa as someone with magical powers, thinking of someone who has the power to overcome demons. So it was interesting that the Gaelic tradition ended up adding this 5th line here about Vajrapani. To me, it sort of indicates that sort of magical power. But anyway, that'd be suitable to just, we could all recite this. Maybe 5 times in Tibetan. I have the English there if people are more comfortable with that. But I kind of wish Venerable Kedru Geshe Sunam was here to recite, but I guess I'll just go ahead. So, Mingmei Tsewe Turchen Malu Jumte Sangwe Da Ganchin Kepe Tsugen Turchen Chenri Brime Kempe Wongpo Jumpe on Dopung Malu Jumse Sangwe Da Ganchin Kepe Tsugen Tsongkhapa Losung Drakpe Shapla Solwa Da Migmei Tsewe Turchen Chenri Brime Kempe Wongpo Jumpe on Dopung Malu Jumse Sangwe Da Ganchin Kepe Tsugen Tsongkhapa Losung Drakpe Shapla Solwa Da Migmei Tsewe Turchen Chenri Brime Kempe Wongpo Jumpe on Dopung Malu Jumse Sangwe Da Ganchin Kepe Tsugen Tsongkhapa Losung Drakpe Shapla Solwa Da. Yeah, and I guess, well, I'll just introduce myself first. So like many of you, I got interested in Tibetan Buddhism and basically converted to the Gaelic tradition at Kopan Monastery. I went there in 2011, just as a backpacker, and found myself doing one of their 10-day discovering Buddhism retreats, which really changed my life. After that, I went to Maitripa College for 3 years. Here I am at Maitripa with Yangtze Rinpoche. Went on to University of California, Santa Barbara to do my PhD. Now I'm at Toronto, like Dave mentioned. And my research really focuses on the early history of Ganden Monastery and the construction of the Gaelic tradition. And yeah, part of my motivation is really feeling like, I mean, I want my work to be accessible to folks like you, like modern people today who are interested in the Gaelic tradition, hopefully inspire some of you to learn more about figures like Lama Tsongkhapa. And yeah, just really remember um, just how incredible a teacher he was and how much of an impact he's had on Tibetan Buddhism and anyone who uh, is a follower of the Gaelic tradition or has any faith in Tsongkhapa or the Dalai Lama or Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe or any other Gaelic teachers. Just to sort of orient us, so Tsongkhapa, of course, is from this region up here in Tsongkha, which here's the city of Lhasa. Here's Nepal, Kathmandu. So it's up here in the northeast region of Amdo. So just some bare facts. I mean, Tsongkhapa, as many of you know, indicates the region where he was from. He's a man from Tsongkha. This is sometimes an interesting point. So some scholars have wondered if his father was Mongolian, because his father, we do know, was what Tibetans call a Darakache, which is basically a title for a Yuan dynasty era administrator. So the Yuan dynasty was a basically Mongolian dynasty, and they had administrators over the lands they conquered slash administrated. So some people have suggested because his father was a Darakache, maybe he was Mongolian because he was a Yuan dynasty administrator. I've kind of looked into it. I think it's likely his father was not Mongolian because um, if you think of administrators in far-flung corners of the empire, many of them would want to be locals, actually, like local people who speak the local language can effectively administrate the local people. So I think it's more likely his father was simply an Amdo person. I don't see any reason to think he was Mongolian, but it is an interesting kind of historical question. This is actually a fun point that I haven't seen mentioned by any other historians. I don't think, I mean, obviously, Thupten Jinpa's biography of Tsongkhapa is the major source we have in English. And I haven't seen anyone, well, obviously, so Rudolf Kaszewski, I don't know how to pronounce that, Kaszewski, is one scholar who pointed out that in a Chinese biographical dictionary, states that Tsongkhapa's birth name was Ajie. My Chinese pronunciation is also terrible, I'm sorry. Which would translate to Drangme in Tibetan, or incalculable. So I just like to share that. I mean, it makes me want to imagine Tsongkhapa as a young boy running around in Tsongkha and his mom calling him Drangme. Anyway, that's just a fun fact. Then the fourth Karmapa grants Tsongkhapa lay vows and the sort of lay Buddhist name of Kunga Nyingpo. And then when he takes Buddhist ordination, that's when he attains the name Losang Drakpa. It's very well known. Or sometimes rendered Losang Drakpe Pel. The Pel basically indicates a specific Vinaya lineage. And then his tantric name is Dunya Dorje or Amoga Vajra. Yeah, so what did Tsongkhapa look like? He was a very tall and imposing figure. He's said to have had a broad forehead, a high nose bridge, and a big nose. So Jinpa has this nice anecdote that when he was younger, they called him the big-nosed Amdoa, the Amdo Naoche. And he had a head like a parasol. And he had a full and resonant voice, and he also had a slight Amdo accent that they say made his speech melodious. Although part of me wonders if that's just a kind of poetic license. I mean, uh, any of us who try to speak Tibetan know that sometimes the Amdo or Kampa accents can be harder to understand. But anyway, he did have an Amdo accent. So this is a lovely image of Tsongkhapa that I came across in another presentation. So this is a statue of Tsongkhapa commissioned out of Tashi Humpo Monastery for a Qing dynasty ruler. And if we think about the description we just saw with the sort of, larger head, prominent nose, I like to think that maybe this might be a fair likeness of Tsongkhapa. I couldn't find the source for this talk, but Tashi Humpo Monastery, of course, this was the monastery founded by Gendun Drut. This is the first Dalai Lama and one of the, along with the three seats of Gandan, Sera, and Drepung, Tashi Humpo would be the fourth great Gelug monastery. I want to say that there's a famous likeness of Tsongkhapa, a statue or painting at Tashi Humpo that was probably designed or overseen by Gendun Drut. I think that's the case. I couldn't find the source. Hopefully someday someone will research this monastery. If that's the case, I mean, I'm just speculating, sort of educated speculation. It's possible this statue we're looking at is based on a likeness of Tsongkhapa that was made by Gendun Drut himself. Because to me, this statue has a sort of human sort of likeness that other images that are more stylized don't. So I would like to think this is what Tsongkhapa looked like, but who really knows? But so here we have some other images from, these are all very early. Tsongkhapa, of course, passed away in 1419. So these are all some of the earliest images we have from of him uh, from textual uh, publications. So looking at it, I think we can sort of see a prominent nose on these side shots. Definitely seems like a sort of rounder face, larger head, even some nice jowls going on. So I like to, just looking at these, I sort of like to imagine what he might have looked like, what it might have been like to be able to sit at his feet or hear one of his teachings, or maybe be one of the first people in the crowd at the first Munlam Chenmo Great Prayer Festival in 1409. What was Tsongkhapa like? They say he was very gentle, compassionate, and easy to be around. He was very patient and respectful with questions. He was always polite and deferential. He would always use people's titles. He wouldn't call people just by their name, but for example, use their titles. Like today, we have titles like Geshe-la or and so forth. And he was very respectful to women. And he had an intellect that resembled the penetrating power of a spear flying through the air. And what was it like to be around Tsongkhapa? So being in his presence would bring people a sense of joy and peace. They would easily progress in their understanding of the Dharma and their realizations. Some were said to have real visceral physical reactions. Some would tremble out of respect when even approaching the path to his quarters or seeing his quarters or being in his presence. And one said that one gains more insight from spending a period of time drinking tea at the feet of Tsongkhapa and asking him questions than from personal contemplation of a given text for months of years. Yeah, and many of us who've had the good fortune of being able to study with great masters um, can probably relate to this as well. All right, so just very briefly, just to sort of give a sense of how I kind of approach the Gaelic tradition, how I study it. As you all know, many people have studied the Gaelic tradition in terms of its scholastic and monastic dimensions. So scholastic really refers to philosophical texts, translating texts. Um, so of course, this is the work of uh, renowned scholars like uh, Robert Thurman and Jeffrey Hopkins and Jose Cabezon and um, Garfield. What's Garfield's first name? Garfield, the professor of Buddhist philosophy. J. Garfield. And many others, too many to name. But my research kind of applies what we could call a corrective, basically emphasizing that the Gaelic tradition is more than just philosophy and monasticism, but also the crucial importance of things like magical powers, like the magical power of a tantric adept, a mahasiddha, the importance of prophecies, and the importance of these popular practices like pilgrimage. I won't go into too much detail, but most of my research is based on translating classical Tibetan texts. So these could be biographies of Tsongkhapa or Khedrubje or other early Gaelic figures, works of praise they composed, letters they wrote, broader religious histories of the Gaelic tradition, chujung, political histories, um, or chronicles, logya, and then pilgrimage guides of Gandan. And yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize that magical power is not something uh, distinct or different from qualities like virtue or erudition, that these, in general, in Buddhist history, are all qualities of a Buddhist saint. So even the Buddha himself, of course, was virtuous, of course, was omniscient, but he also possessed and was not shy about showing his magical powers when he needed to. And the same thing for Lama Tsongkhapa. And one big reason for this is that many people historically and even today um, are impressed by magical power. This is something that causes people to have devotion, to bestow patronage, offerings, monetary offerings, social support. So magical power is really an important part of this puzzle of how Buddhist traditions succeed. And religious traditions in general, we could note. I mean, magical power is something also present in Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism. And it's just a major part of religions in general that in modern times sometimes gets neglected. Yeah, so one focus of my research is really emphasizing, reimagining Tsongkhapa as a tantric adept. So this is a really central part of a journal article I published that some of you can look at. It's on my academia.edu page. Um, so what we're seeing here is a category called the Five Visions of the Lord Tsongkhapa. J. Sikpang Ngadan. So these were 5 visions of Tsongkhapa that Kedrup J had after Tsongkhapa passed away, when Kedrup J was really missing his teacher, feeling sort of just very alone, very bereft. Actually, this is kind of poignantly, this is similar to the situation FPMT is in after the passing of Lama Zopa, just feeling like we've lost this great master. How do we carry on? Um, so I'll just read just a brief description here from Elijah Ari's book, Authorized Lives. So this is the 5th vision Kedrup J had, and it goes, then Tsongkhapa appeared to him riding a fierce tiger and dressed as a yogi. He was red with bulging eyes and a prominent nose. Well, that's funny. The prominent nose is still there after death. In the sky, his right hand brandished a radiant sword, while at his heart, his left hand held a skull cup overflowing with nectar. His hair was red, and in his top knot was stuck a blue flag, and he wore ornaments made of bone. He was surrounded by an entourage of 80 fearsome Mahasiddhas, and he smiled brightly, saying, "Son, do not let your mind sway. I think of nothing but you. Who else do you think of but me? I have not gone off and left you alone. Remember me as my philosophical and tantric yigcha." That's his, what do you call? That's his lamrim and ngakrim, the philosophical and tantric stages of the path. Our Tsongkhapa's testament and proxy rely on them. In general, the virtue of sentient beings has diminished and the afflictions are strong. The conclusion to the teachings has been written. Abandon your desire to join the celestial beings. So this is really noteworthy because Tsongkhapa, as opposed to, so in the 4 prior visions, he appeared in forms that are more perhaps recognizable or less surprising as a Buddhist monk, as Manjushri himself, again as a Buddhist monk. But in the 5th, he appears in this aspect as a fierce tantric Mahasiddha, which is really noteworthy. And part of this, I argue, is because after he passed away, the sort of desire, the sort of argument was, we don't want to imagine that Tsongkhapa is gone. We don't want to think that he's left us. And one way he's still present is in the way that Tantric Mahasiddhas also continue to have power even after they pass away, which is that they've sort of gone beyond being an ordinary person. They have the sort of magical power of a tantric adept that even after death, they can appear, their actions can affect the real world. So this is really important when you have a new tradition and the founder of the tradition has passed away and you're trying to preserve and maintain the tradition. Yeah, so really just gonna go through some different examples of Tsongkhapa's magical powers or different, basically random topics at this point. We're just going to go through some different things. So first is a miracle he performed at the first Munlam Chenmo in Plaza, the first Great Prayer Festival. So Jinpa's wonderful biography has a brief description of this. And he says, as the festival progressed, more and more lay people came to pay homage and take part in the celebration, circumambulating the temple, topping off the numerous butter lamps, chanting prayers, and making prostrations to the Jokung. One evening, one of the large butter lamps was not refilled on time, so the thick, oil-soaked wick burst into flame, causing the gathered devotees to panic. Seeing this, Tsongkhapa entered into meditation, and thankfully, with very little wind blowing, the fire did not get out of control. Jinpa goes on to note that sources describe crowds of over 10,000 lay people, in addition to around 8,000 monastics taking part in the prayers. So if we think about this, we can just note this was perhaps one of, if not the largest gathering of Tibetan Buddhist devotees in Tibetan history. And what happens? Tsongkhapa performs a miracle in front of, in amidst of the throngs of crowds circumambulating the Jokong. And we can just imagine the reaction of regular Tibetan lay people and also Buddhist monks at seeing the magical powers of Tsongkhapa. It might even seem like, it might seem sort of either convenient or it's just noteworthy that he performed this miracle basically in front of a massive crowd. He wasn't trying to hide it, and it was almost like he was broadcasting it to as large a crowd as possible. All right, switching gears to the founding of Ganden. So here we see Ganden, which became, along with Sarah and Drepung, uh, one of the largest Buddhist monasteries in the world. Also, Ganden's called the mother monastery of all Gelug monasteries. It was founded by Tsongkhapa also in 1409, 1410. The first buildings were completed. And it's where Tsongkhapa spent the last 10 years of his life. So, Ganden was chosen because it was prophesied by Vajrapani to this other figure who sort of details I described in my journal article, which I guess just goes to show the sort of context of the religious culture. Anyway, this is kind of a fun one. So the exact location of Ganden was chosen when Tsongkhapa came to the site and a crow actually grabbed his hat and carried it away. And he dropped the hat at a specific spot that became the spot that created Ganden. It's hard to say what exactly this means. It could be an indication. Crows are often linked with specific deities, like Mahakala. It could be gesturing towards this sort of understanding. It could also be a form of divination. There's a type of divination called a bird divination. I haven't really looked into it too much, but anyway, it just goes to show again that sort of decision-making process, you need prophecies, you need sort of these auspicious signs or divinations. And then just pragmatically, a large monastery needs a source of water. So Tsongkhapa did what any compassionate magical adept will do. He touched his finger into the cliff face, and then a magical, miraculous water spring emerged to provide water for Ganden. I don't have much to say about this. This is just an image of Ganden's golden throne that Tsongkhapa would have first sat on, and then successive Ganden Tripas would also have sat on. I don't know, this doesn't look like the original. So the original throne was made out of earth and then covered with gold. Sadly, Ganden was largely destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So I don't know, this one doesn't look like, it's possible. There's no information in the source, but who knows? It would be wonderful if it was the original. Yeah, so just to share some stories about Tsongkhapa's power over spirits. So probably the most influential one was in 1413. And basically, one other Lama had prophesied that he would die at this time. But he was able, fortunately, thankfully, to overcome his illness, basically with the help of basically all of his disciples started doing rituals. Tsongkhapa himself entered into subtle Tukdam meditations. protectors were involved, and they were able to overcome the obstacles to his lifespan by conquering these maras or demons. And then the story goes that there was a white earth pounder in the vicinity of his practice that was the remnant of some medicine that was offered by the gods. So then this white earth powder was beneficial for those who fall ill from unsuitable conditions of earth and water. So again, showing how the sort of divine um, aspects of Tsongkhapa's life really was important and had a kind of pragmatic effect on people in the area. Just another story. So one day, Tsongkhapa was in his practice hut at Ganden, and a local spirit or kind of earth lord or even landlord, we could say, lifted up a large boulder from underneath the practice hut while Tsongkhapa was inside of it. In response, Tsongkhapa lifted up and brought down a shower of boulders, and there are imprints of both the spirit's two hands and knees, as well as imprints of Tsongkhapa's own hands on the circumambulation route. So Tsongkhapa kind of lifted up his hands, and then I guess sort of went like that, pressed them down to the earth, and that brought down the boulders. So again, just showing Tsongkhapa was not merely a scholar, not merely a virtuous monk, but really someone who was not to be messed with, someone really powerful, someone who could conquer all demons, all spirits, and so forth. So this is an image of Tupuang Tsultrimma. So this is the main support or receptacle of Yangpachen Temple. Yangpachen Suklakang is probably the main, we could call the main temple of Ganden. It's called Tsultrimma. Tsultrim is ethics. So this statue is said to propagate the proverbial scent of ethics, which is kind of a nice poetic turn of phrase for the Gelug tradition, the sort of virtuous tradition. But it's not merely an ethical source of ethics, it's also sort of magical statue. So it would speak prophecies to Tsongkhapa, tell him what was going to happen in the future. And also it had power over demons. Well, Tsongkhapa had power over demons, and so does this statue, because another name for this statue is the Tupa Dudul, which means like the sage who, it's really the sage Marajit. Marajit is an epithet for a Buddha that means like conqueror of demons. So one Gelug author, the first Purbuchok, says the complete gnosis of bliss emptiness of the father, J. Lama Tsongkhapa, manifests as the great body of the Tupa Dudul. By merely seeing, hearing, remembering, or touching this statue, one is certain to obtain victory of the four classes of Maras. So what's going on here? So basically, Perchok is saying, well, we can imagine first, a lot of people visited Ganden as pilgrims. When they see this statue, then they won't be harmed by demons. This statue grants that power. But Perchok says we should be aware this statue itself originates in the mind of Tsongkhapa, the complete gnosis of bliss emptiness of Tsongkhapa. So really, this power over demons is also grounded in Tsongkhapa's own realization. So again, we see just how important Tsongkhapa's sort of miraculous status was all over Ganden. Yeah, which we also see here. So Ganden Kenpa is a type of incense from Ganden. And I'll just read this narrative here. So during a chickenpox epidemic, Tsongkhapa cut and scattered his hair around Ganden. It grew into a type of grass that was burned as incense to purify the air. It was distributed to every household containing the epidemic. After this, Ganden Khenpa became popularized and widely used to cure various illnesses and purify air pollution, as the grass possesses blessings and special virtues due to the consecrated ground of Ganden. So again, we see the same thing. Tsongkhapa has these magical powers. Much like in recent times during COVID, Buddhists wanted ways to counteract it. So this basically magical incense originates from Tsongkhapa's own hair. Um, and this is an incense that's popular and used and sold to this day. Yeah, so not just his hair. So Tsongkhapa's tooth is a well-known sort of relic from Tsongkhapa. So this tooth emerged from Tsongkhapa's mouth. It's housed here in this uh, stupa at Ganden. And the tooth is said to have transformed into the form of Manjushri. The tooth produces ring cell relics. The tooth miraculously emits light. Professor Cabazon informed me that when he visited Ganden, the tooth was still visible there today, and monks would press some barley dough into it and then distribute that to pilgrims. And this tooth has the power to grant freedom from all negativities. So again, we're really getting the idea of Tsongkhapa as having these miraculous powers. Even his tooth is still alive, still generates relics, still blesses everyone who comes to view it and get these barley sort of contact relics. Yeah, and Tsongkhapa, like many tantric saints, had the power to read minds. So in 1415, there was a really famous gathering at this place called Tashidoka, which was attended by a veritable who's who of the wealthy and powerful in central Tibet, meaning all of the most important lamas, many monks, also the political elites of the time, the ruler of Tibet, the ruling family, powerful nobles. So again, just like the Munlam Chenmo, it's interesting, it's noteworthy that at these gatherings where there were many people present, Tsongkhapa chose to flaunt his magical power. Basically what happened, they were having some sort of Dharma discussion, and then the name of one Buddhist figure came up. I forget the name exactly. And another monk in the crowd wondered, I wonder what the Sanskrit equivalent of this Tibetan name would be. Tsongkhapa read his mind and then said something. I forget what he said. He probably gave the name or asked someone else to provide the name. And then the monk cried out to the figure sitting beside him that Tsongkhapa had read his mind. That figure was nonplussed. He was not surprised at all. And he said, "What? You didn't know that until now? I've known that all along." So during this time I've spent in Tsongkhapa's presence, I felt more joy and more fear in equal measure. So again, this is the power of a sort of tantric adept, inspiring faith, shocking people with your magical powers, inspiring joy and devotion. This was a huge part of Tsongkhapa's life that we should really understand. Oh yeah, this is leading to maybe one of my favorite stories from Tsongkhapa's life, which is okay, so it starts with, so one day Tsongkhapa received a message from his mother asking him to return home to Amdo, to Tsongkha, along with a tuft of her white hair. Because we know Tsongkhapa left Amdo to go to central Tibet to study the Dharma, and he was never able to return home. And his mother was advanced in age. She had white hair. She wanted to see her beloved son one last time. So she sent him this message. So what was Tsongkhapa a loving son to do? I mean, like any loving son, he was really tempted. He was really saddened. He wanted to see his mother again. But he realized if he goes back home, that he might lose the chance he had in central Tibet to study the Dharma, to study with great masters, to become a Buddhist master himself. So he chose not to return. He did send a letter to his mom, along with a self-portrait that he drew from ink and his own nose blood. And again, showing his power, this image miraculously said the word mother or ama when it was opened. Which leads to, I think, my favorite story about Tsongkhapa's life, the time he heard cuckoos at Ganden. All right, so the story goes, he heard the song of a cuckoo bird at Ganden, and this reminded him of his mother, and he became really saddened. And he does what any tantric magical adept would do. He commanded the cuckoo birds to be silent. And from that point until the modern day, 600 years later, the story goes that you will not hear the song of cuckoo birds at Ganden. And then we see here, this is the letter A, or the letter A in Tibetan. So the story goes that when he was saddened by the cuckoo birds, um, he called out to his mother. Some people say he called out her name, Shingsa Ache. To me, it seems more likely he probably just called out mother. He called out Ama. So the letter A was miraculously and spontaneously inscribed in the cliff here. How are we doing on time? Yeah, so we could sort of analyze this story too on another level, which is the fact that cuckoo birds in Tibet were probably coming from India, and I think cross-culturally are kind of um, linked to fertility, sensuality. So there is this kind of interesting symbolic reading of this too, that Tsongkhapa, who advocated celibacy, strict celibacy for monks, was banishing cuckoos at Ganden. I don't know if that's really part of the meaning, but it is sort of interesting secondary uh, reading. And not only is this a sign of Tsongkhapa's magical power, uh, it was the inspiration for this really beautiful poem written by Chime, who's a contemporary female Tibetan poet from Amdo, who wrote a poem, The Lama Tsongkhapa Who Missed His Mother Atop Gandan Mountain, on the occasion of the 600th anniversary of Tsongkhapa's passing away. So that was 2019. And it was translated nicely by Lowell Cook. So I thought I'd read it here. It's just really lovely uh, poem invoking this story I just mentioned. So now we can really appreciate it. So she wrote, through a self-controlled synchronicity, I went first to your meditation cave and thought of you, Guru, who could not meet your mother. The twilights of the solstices and the anguish of thinking of you each morning silenced even the songs of the cuckoo flocks amidst the thickets. Your mother, Shingsa Ache, might be wondering, are you hungry, my son? You must be cold, my son. Are you weary, my son? Mother Shingsa Ache surely thinks of you whenever she eats something tasty. Surely misses you if she glimpses some nice clothing. Surely thinks of you when she sees others your age. And surely misses you all the more when she glances at the toys and baby clothes from your childhood. Surely she hugs them to her chest. Surely she looks at them day after day. Sensing you right beside her, she surely loves and cherishes them. Tears for you welling up surely flow from her eyes. Mother Shingsa Ache, her desire to meet you, is surely binding itself into her bones. Her desire to meet you surely points her path of life and death toward you. each night passing in tears, surely she welcomes each morning with a sigh. In brief, within a mother's entire lifelong prayer, there is only room enough for you, her son, surely. Surely she has dreams in which she meets you. Surely she believes it might still be possible to meet you. Yet as she's chased by her age, she thinks how she wasn't able to meet you, her son. Surely her head rests against his pillow. Surely her hindsight is cast on you. And surely, just like that, Mother Shingsa Acha's life is stitched. If all mothers under the sky share the same joys and sorrows, then I've also come, bearing a mother's anguish, to visit you. Carry in my hands the suffering of being neither fully alive nor dead. I offer it to you. The suffering of a mother missing her son, I offer to you in place of Mother Shingsa Acha. Which is really a beautiful poem and really invokes wonderfully uh, this popular narrative of Tsongkhapa, along with these common sort of Buddhist tropes of motherhood and the love of a mother for her child. And I really love this story and this poem because it really humanizes Tsongkhapa. He's not just some sort of two-dimensional image or a statue of some long ago figure, 600 years plus ago. But just a real person, just like us, who had a mother who loved him, who missed him, a, a person who missed his own mother when he had to leave home. So just really making Tsongkhapa, I think, really relatable um, in a really lovely way. All right, so another main focus of my research is Ganden Monastery as a pilgrimage site. So Ganden Monastery actually became a really important pilgrimage site, especially along the route to Lhasa. So if you're going from Lhasa to eastern Tibet, you would often pass by Ganden, and they would be almost mandatory to stop uh, and do pilgrimage. The main attraction there was Tsongkhapa's reliquary stupa, so the stupa containing Tsongkhapa's remains. Then there's too many other secondary attractions to go into, but of course these are all connected to Tsongkhapa and other Gelug Lamas. Places they visited or practiced, objects they used, images they blessed or had miraculous interactions with, stories of their lives, etc. So here's an image of Tsongkhapa's precious golden reliquary stupa. That's called Meaningful to See, Tongwa Dundan. So even seeing it grants powerful blessings. Um, yeah, so basically the story goes that after Tsongkhapa passed away, his disciples decided not to cremate him and to actually store his body preserved in this stupa. It surprised me to learn that there's a Tibetan practice of, we could say, embalming or even mummification to preserve Tibetan Lama's bodies. If I'm not mistaken, I think Lama Zopa's body, was it Lama Zopa or another recent Lama? I forget exactly, but this practice still continues to this day. Um, and the idea was if we preserve his body, this will be beneficial for the continuity of the Buddhist teachings. And probably we could say the preservation of Tsongkhapa's Gelug teachings. So there's a couple stories I'll mention here about important people who interacted with this stupa. So Pochlane Sonam Topge was a really powerful Tibetan ruler in the, I think, 18th century. So he made not only physical offerings, but an offering of bodhicitta, practice to Tsongkhapa stupa. And then first a miraculous shower of flowers fell. Then he experienced a stream of nectar. So both these things, the sort of the miracle of showers falling and the experience he had of nectar really granted him faith in the Gelugpa. So it's then that he offered a golden pagoda roof to the building housing Tsongkhapa's golden throne, and really became a patron of the Gelug tradition by way of sort of this miraculous interaction with Tsongkhapa Stupa. The 14th Dalai Lama also has said that one day in 1958, he was in front of Lama Tsongkhapa's tomb in Ganden during his free time. He was alone and made some prostrations in front of the tomb, and he felt so moved, he felt like crying. It was some sort of very special feeling, which makes a lot of sense. And the author of this book says the sort of point the Dalai Lama was making, that it was a sort of past life connection. Of course, Gedundrub, the first Dalai Lama, was a direct disciple of Tsongkhapa. And then finally, most strikingly, indicating the sort of miraculous status, sadly, Tsongkhapa Stupa was opened during the Cultural Revolution. Uh, Reportedly, they found Tsongkhapa's body was completely intact, and not only that, the hair and fingernails on the body had continued to grow. So the hair and fingernails had become, I don't know exactly how long, several feet long, like wrapping around. Uh, and this completely freaked out the Chinese soldiers who at least nominally are atheists. So they were too scared to touch the body. And sadly, Tsongkhapa's body was forcibly cremated at this time, although they were able to preserve some of the ashes and maybe, I think, maybe one of the bones, and then reinter it into the same stupa after the sort of insane period of destruction. So at a later point. Yeah, I think I have time. Just briefly, just some other anecdotes. So this is an image from Tsongkhapa's apartment where he passed away. And the story goes that, as you can imagine, when Tsongkhapa was passing away or passing into parinirvana or passing into enlightenment, whatever you prefer, his disciples were very distraught. They were very saddened. They were freaking out. They were crying. And then miraculously, Tsongkhapa's voice just sort of appeared saying, "I am here," a sign to his disciples that he hadn't gone away. And then this is an image from Tsongkhapa's apartment on the walls that is said to be a speaking image, and also an image that emits light. So again, we see the sort of miraculous power of Tsongkhapa uh, that doesn't go away after he passes away, that's still present and still really important to his disciples, a sign that their master was still here. Just another example from, this is from his practice hut. This is another miraculous image of Tsongkhapa that had the ability to speak. I don't know exactly. So this is an image that was shared. Actually, many of you probably met Khensa Rinpoche, Jetsun Lobsang Delek when he visited. I got to meet with him when he visited Lama Yeshe Ling recently. And he shared with me this image of another miraculous image of Tsongkhapa at Ganden. I believe that also emits light rays. So you can see how important images like these are of Tsongkhapa. You know, even this high Lama like Khensa Rinpoche believes in the profound blessings of these miraculous images of Tsongkhapa, the miraculous powers of Tsongkhapa, to the point he wanted a picture. Khensa Rinpoche had the privilege of going back to Tibet. So this is an image from Ganden Monastery in Tibet recently. Yeah, the last topic I'll sort of talk about is Ganden's famous circumambulation route, the Kora. Basically, the Kora was also chosen by sort of supernatural means. So one day, a strong wind carried away Tsongkhapa's belongings and scattered them. and basically where his belongings fell indicated basically the borders of the Kora route. This is just a fun fact. This is also how they explain why most Ganden Tripas aren't from Ganden. They're actually from Drepung and Sera. And a famous saying about Ganden is that Ganden is surrounded by spontaneously arisen images, Rangjin, Sera by hermitages, and Drepung by Dharma protectors. And here we see an image from Ganden's route. So these are just for the blessings and for your enjoyment. So here we see one spontaneously arisen image of Chenrezig. Here we see one of the three lords, Chenrezig, Vajrapani, probably Manjushri. Might want to look that up. Here we see a spontaneously arisen Mani, Om Mani Padme Hum. I don't think I have time to go into this one. I'll just skip it. The last thing I'll say is that sadly, Ganden Monastery was reduced to rubble during the Cultural Revolution. All the buildings were destroyed. A lot of the religious objects were either destroyed or stolen. But what's amazing is that even after this happened, pilgrims continued to visit Ganden and circumambulate it. And this really shows the importance of just the landscape in Tibet, the mountains, the miraculous grass we learned about, and especially these spontaneously arisen forms, these Rangjin, that are really signs that Tibet's religion, Tibet's culture, Gelug narratives, Gelug religion could never be destroyed because in some sense they are present, they inhere in the land itself. And to me, this is really beautiful and kind of inspiring. And of course, Ganden was rebuilt later, but as hard as some might have tried to destroy Ganden and destroy Tibetan Buddhist religion, you can't destroy the land itself. And these pilgrims continued to come to Ganden and circumambulate, which I think is really beautiful. And yeah, just to sort of sum up, so the Italian Jesuit missionary Ippolito Desideri visited Tibet in the early 18th century and noted that Tsongkhapa is no less worshipped and venerated and has no fewer statues and shrines in the temples than Padmasambhava himself. And I argue that it was Ganden's popularization as a pilgrimage site that played a direct role in the growth of the Tsongkhapa devotional cult, one that venerates Tsongkhapa as a second Buddha in Tibet. And really that his magical powers, his miraculous powers, was way more important to the popularization of Tsongkhapa in this way than his philosophical doctrines. And basically that Tsongkhapa's miraculous powers are still present at Ganden. You can still access his miraculous body and his stupa. You can still access his miraculous hair in the Ganden Khenpa incense. The traces of Tsongkhapa are still there to this day. Yeah, the last thing I'll say is that it's an interesting point that Ganden was adopted as a name for multiple Gelug monasteries. So the main monastery in Mongolia is also called Ganden. So some scholars have thought that the name Ganden was just like a form of branding or marketing. But I would point out the name Ganden was actually chosen for a specific reason. It was one of Tsongkhapa's teachers, Lodrak Namkha Gyaltsen, who told Tsongkhapa that from this life you will arrive in the presence of Maitreya in Ganden, i.e. Tushita, the heaven, Maitreya's heaven of Tushita, and reside there. Therefore, if the name of the monastery also imputes the result in Ganden, there will be an auspicious circumstance akin to you yourself residing. basically saying naming the monastery Ganden is a way of karmically linking it to Tsongkhapa's continued, and we could say almost permanent presence. So instead of a form of branding or marketing, I suggest the name Ganden was used for all these Gelug monasteries as a way to promote the charismatic presence of Tsongkhapa at monasteries all over Tibet, a charismatic presence that was fixed at Ganden, but then spread throughout the Tibetan cultural sphere, all the way from Tibet to even a Dharma center in Burlington, Ontario. All right, so that's my presentation for today. Thank you very much. And I guess we have time for questions now.
Great, thank you. I have a couple of questions myself. One of the things that was kind of miraculous about Tsongkhapa was his relationship with Manjushri. Uh, can you share some stories about that?
Yeah, so the kind of overview is that um, so Tsongkhapa originally uh, had a medium, Lama Umapa, who basically, when Tsongkhapa had questions about philosophy, especially Madhyamaka philosophy, the middle way, he would ask Umapa to ask Manjushri, and then Manjushri would tell Umapa, and Umapa would tell Tsongkhapa. Um, and that's something Elijah Ari has argued is that over time, Tsongkhapa himself was basically considered an emanation of Manjushri, um, which sort of complicates the picture. Why did he need to use Umapa as a medium if he was already Manjushri? But in either case, the fact that Tsongkhapa's understanding of Madhyamaka, understanding of philosophy, basically originates from Manjushri, whether you consider it to be Manjushri via Umapa, or it originates from Manjushri because Tsongkhapa is himself Manjushri. In either case, this is kind of a sign that Tsongkhapa's understanding of philosophy was correct, which of course did lead to certain disputes because Tsongkhapa's understanding of Madhyamaka and other things is distinct from Sakya thinkers, Kagyu thinkers, Nyingma thinkers. So that also led to some debates. And I mean, not to be inflammatory, but it did lead to a sort of famous claim by, I think it was Gorampa, that Tsongkhapa had been fooled. He wasn't uh, having messages from Manjushri, it was actually a demon, which goes to show the kind of contentious nature of the debate. But also, scholars just like to sort of insult and criticize and get after each other. So I don't think we need to read too much into it, but even scholars today like to sort of say things like that to sort of get someone's goat or what have you. But um, yeah.
Great. I also heard a little bit, and that there's many ways to do this, the Gunla Gemma practice, but that it is thought to be something that it just doing that practice also overwhelms harmful energies or yeah, spirit harm. Have you come across anything that says that? I just saw it somewhere a long time ago, and I thought, well, it made me very curious about the different ways of doing Mixema or Gunla Gemma.
Yeah, specifically on Miksema. So one thing that happened is that um, and one scholar wrote an article about this. I can't remember off the top of my head. Basically, he wrote an article that describes how the Miksema over time started to be used for magical powers in a way very similar to like a mantra or a dharani. Because we might think of the Miksema just as a prayer or even as a mantra, something we recite as a prayer to Tsongkhapa. But over time, Gelug started to use it basically as like a ritual invocation. Like you can recite it if you have whatever problem. Maybe it's drought or illness or all these sorts of pragmatic uses. So that's really interesting. It really shows that Tsongkhapa's miraculous power was used in these ways. It's really interesting that the Gandan Lagyama stories about it, it's not really talked about much in historical works. I don't want to say anything blasphemous. I feel like some scholars have wondered like when that practice developed or the sort of elaborations. Maybe there were sort of later developments involved, but it doesn't really come up much. Um, but I will say we can also see that, I mean, that practice is based on Tsongkhapa being in Tushita heaven. And that was something that was prophesied by one of his teachers. And that's really interesting because a lot of later Gelug narratives would say, because of course, to be in Tushita heaven, that means you're not a Buddha. You're still, I mean, you might be like a 10th stage bodhisattva, but you're not a Buddha. But then later, Gelugpa really wanted to say, no, Tsongkhapa is a full Buddha, full stop, even before he was born. Um, so there are these sorts of, um, I don't know if tensions is the right word or just sort of, I mean, we can see that these were historical developments that, aren't always in perfect agreement, which is part of what makes historical work kind of fun and interesting.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll go check if we
Yes,
have
I
any
have a
coming in from social media.
question. Why did you say that the Gaden Tripa is not typically chosen from Gaden Monastery, but Sarah and Drepung? I think I missed that.
Yeah, so that's basically just a historical fact. Uh, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but you might think, okay, there's 3 seats, Ganda and Sarah Drepung. Maybe there'd be a roughly equal distribution, like how many Ganda Tripas basically were trained at Ganden versus Sarah and Drepung. And actually, the fact is, most Ganden Tripas come from Sarah and Drepung, and relatively few come from Ganden, which is just kind of an interesting factoid. Um, I don't think anyone's really tried to explain why. Uh, I mean, I do wonder if part of the reason might be that Ganden was such an important pilgrimage site and they had such an important uh, calendar. Part of pilgrimage too is that they had really major festivals. They had really important rituals they had to perform during these festivals. Um, so I wonder if that was simply taking up some of the time of monks at Ganda. They had sort of divided priorities. The other thing I'll say is Ganda Monastery is also unique in that they take some pride in being a sort of a place of practice. Like Ganden Monastery has been described as a Lamrim Dratsang, like a Lamrim college. So if you're a monk at Ganden, you shouldn't simply study, but you should really try to practice the Lamrim. So I don't have any evidence for this, but I do wonder if that means monks at Ganden maybe also had, maybe they weren't able to become the Geshe Larampa and the greatest scholars if they were also practicing the Lamrim half the time. Um, It also could be because Sarah and Drepung also became more politically powerful. So maybe they also had just more influence and more prestige. And that's why their lamas would become Ganden Tripa, because their lamas were the most powerful and wealthy and so forth. So those, I mean, that just gives a sense of some of the possible things that were going on.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question if I could, Michael. So it's interesting that you speak about the mystical or the realizations or powers, whatever, as you would like to call it, of Lama Tsongkhapa. But and I may be wrong, so I'm just asking for some thoughts on this, is that in the current Gaelic tradition, I have this understanding or impression that it's considered that masters of this day and age there's some kind of injunction against showing magical powers. I don't know if this is true or not. This is my impression that like maybe in other traditions, it's considered more acceptable to show magical powers or whatever. But whereas in the Gaelic tradition, there's some kind of, injunction, or if that's the right word. Is that true, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that tension we can trace back to the historical Buddha too. So in the Vinaya, the Buddha had rules against monks displaying their magical powers, that it was inappropriate. Um, but at the same time, the Buddha's famous for showing his miraculous powers, like the twin miracle at Shravasti, when he had fire and water. He emitted fire and water from two halves of his body simultaneously. So I think that's kind of part of Buddhism in general, just this kind of tension. But I think, so one reason I was inspired to talk about the importance of magical powers in the Gaelic tradition is because, unlike some scholars, I've actually spent time. I spent time at Kopan, I spent time at Maitripa, and like many of you probably know, people talk about the magical powers of Gaelic lamas, like Lama Zopa, like going without sleep, or such and such lama reading minds, or such and such lama having the city of like swift feet. So that's why when I would see scholars not talking about this in the Gaelic tradition, and describing it as solely monastic and bureaucratic and philosophical, it was clear to me that something was missing in this picture. So that's where I was sort of inspired to, and I knew there was something important to sort of talk about in my work. I mean, probably I would say because Tsongkhapa really emphasized monasticism and sort of strict adherence to the Vinaya. K. says that Tsongkhapa really renewed the tradition of not eating after noon, of not drinking chang or alcohol, things like this. I think probably that's where some of the Gaelic tradition's kind of conservatism comes from. So maybe that's why, and probably that's why the Gaelic tradition is less open about this sort of charisma, like magical powers, or of course, even things like drinking alcohol, or um, kind of the more unconventional behavior of tantric adepts. Most Gaelics don't really adopt. But at the same time, it wasn't just Tsongkhapa. Like K. had magical powers, the fourth Ganden Tripa, on and on. So this is never something that the Gaelics ever could reject, and frankly, they never would, because having magical powers is just one of the products of a Buddhist saint. Abandoning magical powers would be tantamount to saying the Gaelic tradition doesn't have any Buddhist saints. So yes, less emphasized, but it would never be kind of rejected or abandoned in any way.
Thank you.
So healing powers, that would be, being able to, and Mo, these are some things that are common, the Mo, a divination system. So that, I guess you call that a miracle power, being able to have really accurate Mo. Yeah. So there's questions coming in through our YouTube channel. Sean is asking, were any of Tsongkhapa's interpretations of Madhyamaka teachings entirely new, or did his interpretation have historical precedents? If so, what was novel?
Yeah, so that's a very big question. Um, yeah, so I think the prevailing modern academic description of Tsongkhapa's teachings was that he did come up with a kind of novel presentation. But then the question is, so how do you describe new or novel? Because for Tsongkhapa in the Gelug tradition, it was basically a sort of correct interpretation of existing canonical, authoritative Indian Buddhist material. So it's not novel in the sense that he's just understanding them the correct way, and others had misunderstood it before. Of course, then scholars Western and Tibetan have had lots of disagreements, like how should we read Chandrakirti, for example, um, and then why do people read them in different ways? Is it because these are different there's a historical context of different specific Indian masters teaching specific Tibetan students? Or is this like some mystical thing where Tsongkhapa was granted like the correct understanding directly by Manjushri? So you're asking a really big question, but I don't think it's that controversial to say that Tsongkhapa, I mean, it's just a fact. His presentation of Madhyamaka was different from the Tibetan thinkers before him. Um, and then that was debated for hundreds of years to the present day. Well, that's good too, because I mean, this is part of how traditions are kept fresh and sort of revitalized for new places and new audiences. So, I mean, we see that today too with the Dalai Lama um, publishing books like for Westerners and things like this. So, yeah, so newness is like, is anything new in the Dharma, or is just kind of a new sort of repackaging of the same old 84,000 Dharmas? Like, who's to say?
More of a comment than a question, but you mentioned Tsongkhapa putting out a fire. It reminded me of a story I heard of Lama Yeshe that instituted Lama Tsongkhapa in Italy, where there were a kitchen fire started, and people were, it looked like it was going to be quite a big problem. It was a big fire, and everybody was running around yelling, and Lama Yeshe was having his breakfast away from the kitchen, maybe on the terrace, was my impression. And he went into meditation. He didn't seem at all concerned, first of all, completely unconcerned about what was going on, and went into meditation, and the fire went out. So there's
Yeah, there you go. And I bet that caused some faith and devotion,
yes.
some people there. And just on a concrete level, I mean, that just shows power of the elements, earth, fire, water, air. So if you have control over the elements, then yeah, causing some wind to come snuff out a fire or stopping a fire, it's really not a big deal.
There's another story of Lama Yeshe Institute. In fact, Jugini, they had a retreat there. This was some time ago. Well, Lama Yeshe was when he was still alive, I guess. Yeah, some time ago. So at the end of the retreat, they wanted to have a picnic. The plan was to have a big picnic, but the weather forecast was looking pretty bad, and so they were saying, okay, we're not gonna be able to do that. And Lama Yeshe said, no, go ahead with the plans. We're going to have a picnic. You worry about the picnic, I'll worry about the weather. And so when the time came for the picnic, the weather cleared and you could see a ring of clouds in the horizon in every direction, but it was sunny where they were. And when the picnic was over, the weather got bad again. So it seems to be a lot of these kind of stories. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. I was curious, you mentioned the prayer near the end of the video that they used for magical powers. I'm not interested in magical powers. I'm just interested in the prayer. It sounds interesting. Is there a link for that? Or do you have one that is translated for English?
Yeah, so it's the Miksema, which is the prayer we recited at the beginning. I'm trying to look on my computer for that article describing the magical uses of it. I can't find it right now, but if you email me, I could send it to you. It's a really interesting article.
Absolutely, I will. Can you share your email in the chat, please?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you for the teaching. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for
And
coming.
we have a question that's in the Zoom chat here from Cindy asking, are magical powers incidental to practice, or are they directly sought after or sought in particular training?
I think both, to be honest. So basically in South Asian religion in general, magical powers arise when you have sort of meditative attainments, a certain level of meditative attainments. And it's not just Buddhists, so Hindus, Jains, anyone, Westerners, anyone who has meditative attainment, these things are just sort of natural byproducts, like the ability to read minds or control the elements or fly through the air or walk through walls. So in that sense, they're just a natural byproduct. It's not really something you seek out. Because of course, Buddhists would say the real goal is enlightenment, benefiting others. But that points to the question, so how do you benefit other people? There's certain cases where having magical powers can be really beneficial. For example, if there's a fire about to break out and harm a lot of people, having the power to stop that is really beneficial. Or if some people have faith in a charlatan or someone who's going to lead them down a bad path. So actually, this is a fun story from Tibetan history. There was a sort of false Buddha. I forget exactly. It might have been 10th century, 11th century. And he was called Buddha Star King. So he was almost like what we would call a cult leader today. He had a huge following. Apparently, he had the magical power of he would meditate and float in the air. And a lot of people were following him. And the story goes, a Buddhist saint came along. I forget which Buddhist saint. It might have been Atisha. It might have been someone else of that time period who knew he was a charlatan. And basically, I think while he was floating in the air, I think he pointed at him and then he fell down to the earth. And everyone could see that he really wasn't that impressive after all. So that's a case where actually using your magical powers is almost flaunting it is important because you had all these people who were following this false teacher. It would have been harmful to the Dharma, harmful to these beings. So that's a good example of like a compassionate use of magical powers. But especially in Tibet, there's also really controversial uses of magical powers. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but basically Tibetan history is, and this is true of history in most pre-modern places, just a history of ongoing conflicts between different regions, between different Buddhist traditions. So there's some Tibetan lamas who got involved and they would do things like cast basically what we could call black magic spells against the other army, or trying to destroy the other army, or even kill figures on the other side. You know, things that do seem unethical and counter to Buddhist ethics in general. Of course, they might try to couch it as sort of compassionate tantric violence, but I think in many of these cases, it did seem kind of like a mundane and maybe even inappropriate use of magic. So yeah, you just have a range of sort of uses and contexts where magic is used.
Yeah, I think if the longer you hang out in a tradition like this, you'll start to hear stories from various people. I'm wondering, the Lama Yeshe's biography probably has many more stories like that of when he's done things that are hard to explain. Which was published a few years ago in two very large volumes, which is basically a collation of stories. So yeah, that might be something. It is a modern sort of, to create the FPMT out of nothing in the span of a single lifetime. There must have been something that inspired people, that got people's attention. So it might be kind of fun to go read that biography. I don't, yeah, yeah.
No, I'm sure many stories in his life, and I'm sure if and when a biography of Lama Zopa is written, I'm sure there'll be many inspiring stories there as well.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, there's a few things that are like he definitely seemed to know what was going on in my mind, and would add things into teachings that seemed to speak directly to what was going on in my mind. You know, that that became kind of commonplace and fairly unsurprising after a while. Yeah, maybe just my own mind, but it started to be something you could kind of rely on, it seemed like. Any other questions? That's it for chat, I think. Yeah. Do you have any other stories you've heard of Lama Tsongkhapa or other lamas? I mean, since you're interested in this topic, you must have other stories. This is Thupten Jimba's book you're looking at, Tsongkhapa's biography.
He has a chronology at the end, so that might jog my memory. I mean, I do want to ask, how did you all find the story of Tsongkhapa's mother and the cuckoo and the poem? Like, I really love that poem, especially.
Mm.
How did people find it?
Very strong language, very strong images about was it was something really grabbed back. I can't remember. It was about how her whole life was about having a child. And yeah, something about her bones. That one really grabbed me.
Yeah, why don't I can put the link to that poem in the chat. There's also a reading of it in Tibetan, if anyone could understand that.
It also reminded me of Geshe Sona or Geshe-la, Geshe Sonam, a resident teacher here, Lama Yesling. He's an only child, and so his mother is still alive in Tibet. She's living with relatives, and so they're all on kind of a family farm in a very remote part of Tibet. Luckily, he's able to talk to her on video chat several times a week, most of the time. But he must also miss his mom, and particularly being an only child, feels some responsibility, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I love about that whole story, just really humanizing Tsongkhapa, because I don't know what it's like to be a high lama, but I do know what it's like to miss your mom and really feel that pain, and but also feel like, oh, I have something else to do, or something important to do with my life. Um, so I really love that story. And I put the link in the chat for anyone who wants to. It's a great, there's also the translator has kind of a short sort of commentary on the poem, and there's some nice images, and definitely check it out.
Martha, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you so much for this teaching. Michael, well, I have two things. First, I want to ask you, where did you born? And your parents also. And also, I am about the cuckoo and this bird. It's very interesting. I was living in Mexico with the native people in the south of Mexico, and they have a lot of stories also about the birds and the connection that birds has with people. Some bring messages, and so that makes me call my attention in your story. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So my parents are from South Korea. They immigrated from South Korea. I was born in Toronto. Definitely when I have been in Nepal or India, uh, I've gotten a lot of people guessing. A lot of people think I might be like Mongolian or Bhutanese. I've also gotten Northeast Indian. I don't think people really think I'm Tibetan. I probably got it once or twice. Um, but definitely the long hair too. People often think, yeah, maybe Mongolia or Bhutan or Northeast India. But yeah, the point about birds is really good to know because, it might be tempting to think of Tsongkhapa or the Dalai Lama or any High Lama as quote unquote civilized or rational people. But for someone like Tsongkhapa, you can see how important, practices that today we would call indigenous practices were. So these were part of his life. It's not unusual for this great Lama to watch the crow, where the crow took his hat, and think that's where my monastery will be. There's nothing contradictory between that and studying Buddhist commentaries for 4 years and writing philosophical treatises. You don't need to make some sort of distinction between, oh, this is like an elite intellectual practice of this like social elite, and this is the indigenous practice of lay people. We don't need to make that distinction, which is also a sort of drive of my work, sort of criticizing these sort of false kind of distinctions.
I think that's a modern day thing that we think that of analysis, intellectual analysis things, poo-pooing any sort of mystical or difficult to explain, because our current day analysis is really totally preoccupied with the external world, by and large, right? And so we think that there's no that these things don't fit together. That the only significant thing that you can talk about as an academic or as an intellectual is material, something that you can point to as an external thing. Whereas during Tsongkhapa's day, that wasn't at all the case.
Yeah, and ironically, something I recently learned, people think that in modern times people are becoming less religious or less spiritual. But I saw a poll or survey recently, how many Canadians believe in spirits, and it was basically evenly split. It's basically 1/3 of Canadians believe in spirits, 1/3 of Canadians don't believe in spirits, and 1/3 of Canadians are kind of agnostic. They don't know. So that's far from the case where, when I asked my undergrads about this, some of them thought it would be like 90% of people today don't believe in spirits. So it's really not even the case. This is just sort of a modern sort of truism, just a sort of assumption that, oh, if we're in a university, we're not the kind of people who believe in spirits. If we're in Canada, we're not the type of people who believe in spirits. And it's really not even accurate to think that way.
Mm.
Sue, I think, has a question. Sue, go ahead.
Not really a question. It's just maybe Lama Tsongkhapa didn't see a crow, but everybody else did. And he knew to build a monastery there because his perception was different. And like maybe it wasn't even a crow, but everybody else without realization saw this crow, or just a thought. Maybe it was Vajrayakini flying in the sky saying, hey, there's, I don't know. Because
Definitely, that's one way of reading the crow. It was perhaps a deity like Mahakala is linked to crows. That's definitely one way of reading it. But I wouldn't want to dismiss the crow entirely because clearly it's an important part of the story for Tibetans. So I wouldn't want to sort of just explain it away or because animals like crows and other types of, I don't know if auspicious animals is the right word, but they're really important. So we don't want to just minimize their importance in these stories.
no, I didn't mean to. I was just stating that perception, like if Tsongkhapa's enlightened, is he actually seeing a crow? And yes, crows are important. They're mystical, ravens and crows.
I had a weird experience with a crow once. I was reading Dharma, and I had my legs outstretched, and on a telephone pole not far away was a crow that called, and so I looked up, and there was this crow, and my feet were pointing directly to that telephone pole where the crow was, and I thought, oh, maybe that's implied. Maybe that crow is somebody special, and so I shouldn't be pointing my feet there. And I thought, nah. And the instant I thought, nah, the crow flew away. It was like, oh dear, wait.
When I went to retreat with Kala Rinpoche, I had a big black raven following me all over around the center, the monastery where the retreat was. And then when I went in, like it would follow me. I mean, it would land in front of me and I'd walk by it and would circle and land in front of me again. And it was huge, huge raven. And then I go in the monastery and I sit down where I was doing my yoga, and the raven went, there's a window on each side of the monastery, and the raven went to the window and was circling in the small area and looking at me through the window. And then it went over the monastery and went to the other window. And it was circling and circling. And now I didn't know the story about the first Dalai Lama and Mahalakad or any of that, but I asked Kalu during intermission. I said, can I ask a question? Is there something with like the raven? Because this raven's following me, and it did. We weren't to eat meat. We weren't to eat later in the day. There were all these, no coffee, all these restrictions. And I went to McDonald's to get a drink, and the thing followed me to McDonald's, because I was walking. It was really bizarre. Anyway, that's my raven story.
Yeah, could have been a protector.
Okay, let me just double check Zoom. See if there's any other comments. No, that's it for comments in the social media. So I think that's any. So if we've yeah, typically go from 1 to 11:30, and then if we go on 12. If there's, do you have any other stories you want to tell us, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, first I would just recommend, if anyone hasn't, to read Thupten Jinpa's biography of Tsongkhapa. It's really a amazing source. I mean, yeah, I guess I could just mention the fact that when Tsongkhapa was passing away, Also, his body apparently miraculously changed. So his body basically transformed into the appearance of a 16-year-old Manjushri. And then miraculous lights started to emerge from his body, like so brilliant that people couldn't even look directly at it. And then I forget the exact tantric sort of language involved, but basically that when he passed away, he was going through a process of, I think, obtaining the Sambhoga Kaya, the sort of enjoyment body. So that I'm sure kind of softened the pain of Tsongkhapa's passing. I mean, it was still devastating. There's really poignant accounts of when he passed away. Basically, all of his followers were thrown into really profound grief, really painful time. But the fact that he had seemingly attained enlightenment and transformed himself at the moment of death, I'm sure was a real comfort. And then, of course, this time is what started the annual holiday of Gaden Ngamche, the sort of Lama Tsongkhapa Day memorial. But yeah, even his death was a sort of miraculous display.
And then Kedrip had these 5 visions.
Yeah, just emphasize, I'm not gone.
Right.
Still here. I'm still around.
So this leads me to think of a question. We hear about the Tulku tradition, of re-emanations of great masters. Has there ever been somebody who's been identified as the reincarnation of Tsongkhapa?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just my informed speculation. So after Tsongkhapa passed away, they decided not to cremate his body. They decided to mummify it and preserve it. And I do wonder whether that was also a way of avoiding the Tulku issue. Because the problem with the Tulku, if it works out, if they recognize the Tulku for Tsongkhapa and it was an amazing Lama, then that would be one thing. If they recognize the Tulku of Tsongkhapa and it didn't turn out well, maybe they weren't very learned or they weren't ethical, etc., then it seems like that could have had devastating effects on the tradition. So it did make me wonder if that was a really skillful way of just avoiding any potential problems. It's almost like Tsongkhapa is still, he's still around. His body is still in the stupa. We didn't cremate it. It's miraculously preserved. So we don't need to even think about recognizing a second Tsongkhapa. That's just my sort of guess. But yeah, there's never really been anyone who's been, as far as I know, I mean, maybe there's a scattered reference somewhere, but I haven't come across anyone who's been considered a reincarnation of Tsongkhapa. There are lineages of Tsongkhapa's father and mother. I think the mother lineage is called like the Shingsa Tulku. His father, I can't recall off the top of my head, but so there are Tulku lineages from his parents, and that does seem to be a way to sort of tap into the sort of charisma of Tsongkhapa's family without making the bold claim that you're Tsongkhapa himself.
I guess there'd be big shoes to fill.
Interestingly, that's the case for Ktrip and Gyaltsab too. There's no recognized Tulku lineages of these first 2 successors of Tsongkhapa. of course, part of the sort of triumvirate, the Jeyapse Sum, the Tsongkhapa, Gyaltsabje, Kedrupje trio. None of them have a Tulku lineage, which is sort of surprising if they're the three highest. And yeah, again, I do wonder if they're too high, so you don't want to sort of risk tainting their legacy or risk tainting their status. And
That's
then, of course, Gendundrup, the Dalai Lama, then became, along with the Panchen Lama, the most important Gelug Lama Tulku lineages.
that's an interesting point, because I've heard His Holiness say that whether or not there's he says that it'd be a shame if the next Dalai Lama can't live up to being similar. So maybe it'd be better if there was no Dalai Lama after this one. He's been saying that sometimes.
I do have a story of His Holiness, the present Dalai Lama, that was given here in Vancouver, Canada, when there was one of his translators was traveling, and he related the story that I always found rather beautiful, that he was translating in India for the Dalai Lama, and the windows, the vast space was of the interior was filled with people, really crowded in, and the windows of the building were elongated and small. They weren't these big windows and during his teaching, a swarm of bees entered the space, and of course was setting off a form of panic within the audience, because these enormous bees were swarming around people, and people were reacting in the crowded space. And the translator said His Holiness stopped giving the talk and entered into a meditation. And he saw this as his translator very, very clearly. And the bees somehow came up, back, formed the swarm, and exited through one of these very small, elongated windows. And he took that as a very beautiful presentation of His Holiness's powers.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe the bees were some sort of hindrances being shown away.
Maybe they wanted to attend the teachings. It is too disruptive.
I do want to say hi to Paola. I just my Tripa comrades here. And Cindy, we met at my Tripa too, I think, at some events.
Thank you, Dr. Ium. I'll be like Tsongkhapa and use this formality now here, but yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ium, for your presentation of your research, and we're much better for having heard this, and thank you so much. And I hope that we can arrange in the future to have you come and speak again on some topics.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. I usually don't shut it off. You just can hang out and chat a bit at the end as well, like in a real place where we might have a cup of tea or something. So I'm trying to develop that habit of just hanging out
You
for a
can
bit. Yeah,
take off the streaming, Dave.
oh, that's right. It wasn't stop the streaming.
David, didn't you have a story about Lama Zopa?
Yeah, there's all kinds of stories about Lama Zopa.
I thought you had one about $100.
Oh yeah, 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 all kinds of beautiful stories. I need to find the streaming. Where did it go? Oh, there we go.